All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on Alumni Relations Trends for 2020. I'm Kalyan, co-founder and CEO at Almabase. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. I mean, over the last few months, for all of us, the line between work and life has become very blurred. There's just so much going on at work and in life. And so I really want to make sure that these 45 minutes that you're spending with us are useful for all of you. But just before we jump in, just a few logistics. All of you are muted by default as attendees. Only panelists, which is myself and Manshi, are unmuted. Feel free to ask questions anytime during the webinar. You don't have to actually hold your questions till the end. And to ask a question, just type it on the chat below. We'll respond to the questions as soon as we're able to during the webinar. And once we receive a question, we'll either sort of read out the question so everybody knows what the question was before we answer that, or if the question needs further explanation, we'll be able to unmute you to let you explain the question, right? And this whole presentation that we're going to walk you through, as well as the recording of the session, will be sent to each of you. So you can just listen in. You don't need to necessarily take screenshots, right? I also want to let my colleague and co-panelist, Manshi, introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Manshi. I'm a marketing manager at Almabase, and I've been doing a ton of research on alumni relations trends over the last few months, and I'm super stoked to share all that I'm learning with you guys.
Thanks, Manshi. So some of you are existing customers of Almabase or have spoken to us in the past, but some of you are not. And so I want to take a brief few minutes to just give you a quick sort of history of Almabase, so you know who we are. So that's me on the left. I was born and raised in India, which is where I went to school. I was super happy to be in college, enjoying everything that college had to offer several years ago. But as my junior year started, I noticed that some of my classmates had to drop out because they couldn't afford tuition anymore. I was really disturbed by this. It didn't make any sense to me that they had to drop out midway. And this was one of the premier sort of colleges in India. But I really wasn't sure if I could do anything. And then a friend of mine actually came along and said, hey, why don't we do this? I mean, our college has 40,000 alumni. Why don't we reach out to them and try and raise money, right? I'm like, that makes sense. I mean, at least we could give it a shot. So that's what we did. So we started collecting data and reaching out to all of our alumni. But it wasn't easy. I mean, we weren't really like an official entity. And this was, again, back in India where alumni philanthropy wasn't really part of the culture, right? But we persisted. And after months of effort, one of our alums came forward, and then she convinced a few more. And eventually we raised enough to sort of ensure none of our classmates actually dropped out that year, right? And then we continued, even after we graduated and started working full-time jobs, we continued raising money and sort of funded hundreds of scholarships. But through this journey, we realized something important. What we realized was that not just at our alma mater, but at many, many institutions globally, the relationship between alumni and their alma maters was broken, right? And that's why, and that's how Almabase was created. We help universities and schools cultivate meaningful, lifelong relationships with their alumni. Our mission, even today, is to help institutions make their education more accessible to everyone by driving more participation from alumni, right? And lo and behold, today we're serving hundreds of institutions across more than 30 countries. A majority of them are in the US. We work with universities and colleges, independent schools, public schools, and other nonprofits as well. But more importantly, one of the things that we sort of take a lot of pride in is that we're the highest rated in terms of customer satisfaction in terms of alumni management software in the world. And so that's a really sort of brief history of Almabase. Now, let's dive right into the topic for today, right? Alumni relations trends for 2020. We have highlighted 5 important trends in this presentation. and listed a few other smaller trends that we've observed. These observations come both from our own customers and their data, sort of in an aggregate format, as well as broader research that we've done on other organizations. I'd like to actually start with a poll. So I request all of you to actually go to this website. So if you can just either on your phone or on your computer, just type in slido.com, right? And enter this code 79376. I'm going to activate the poll here. So you're going to see a few options. The question is, for every 100 alumni relations professionals in 2017, how many do we have now? Just take a guess. Like I said, you can either go to the website on your computer or your phone, or you can even just open your camera and scan this code to be able to get to the website. I'll wait for a few responses to come in. I think we have about 12 responses here. Let me see why the results are not showing up. Okay, there you go. All right, so majority of you think we're less than 80 for every 100 that we had in 2017. Yeah, that's interesting. I think we have a mix across the board. We have about 35 responses. I'll give it a few more seconds for the rest of you to respond. This is actually an interesting trend, and I'll go into a little more detail. We obviously have an answer from some of the survey data, and we'll go through that. Any more responses? Okay, we're seeing a few more coming in, about 41 responses right now. So majority of you think it's less than 80, about a quarter of you think it's more than 120, a quarter of you think it's somewhere between 80 and 100. Interesting. So it's just 82, right? Which is, and like I said, the source of this data, as mentioned here, is the recent 2020 VAESE Alumni Relations benchmarking study. So about 20% of you were sort of accurate. But what does this actually mean, right? The number of alumni relations professionals has dropped, like we saw, 18% in just 3 years, right? And this survey was actually done in early 2020, before COVID, right? And we all know that since then, a lot of alumni relations professionals were furloughed or laid off, in the last few months. So at this rate, I would say that the alumni relations profession is under threat, right? So that's my trend number one. And if we look a little deeper into why this is happening, when we look at the data in terms of how these organizations are structured and why the number of alumni relations professionals are declining so rapidly, as more and more institutions sort of adopt an integrated advancement office, the data is clearly showing that there are fewer alumni relations staff available to work on alumni engagement, right? And the immediate need for donations is superseding the long-term goals of cultivating alumni, which is obviously an alarming trend, something that we all certainly need to work towards reversing. Because if this focus on short-term results continues, it is certainly going to impact the entire industry in the future, right? Like it's like you're trying to force the fruit of the tree to ripen, without letting it naturally ripen, right? Like, I mean, in this kind of environment, it's really important to understand and demonstrate the impact of alumni engagement programs for an institution, because this is the standard question that we get all the time, right? Like, what is the ROI of an alumni program, right? So we'll talk a little bit further about how you can better defend the value of alumni engagement later. But I just wanted to start with this because this is, in my opinion, one of the most alarming trends as far as alumni relations is concerned this year. Right? Let's move on and look at other important trends. Trend number 2, alumni programs are becoming more accessible to everyone, right? So while the pandemic has caused several challenges for alumni programming, I think one really interesting opportunity that it has created is the need to create programs that are accessible to everyone. Alumni relations teams across the board we're seeing are redesigning their programming in a way that is accessible to all alumni, no matter where they are, no matter what they do, right? Especially with virtual engagement taking center stage, location is no longer a constraint. And in the last few months, time is less of a constraint as well, given the lack of travel and things like that. I think we're at a stage where, as an institution, you can no longer afford to design your programming in a way that's only accessible to alumni that live near your campus or in major cities where you have chapters, right? You have to really start thinking about alumni programming in a truly global way, right? Anybody should be able to participate. I have this visualization of how this looks, where your alumni are at the center, right? Not your university, not your staff. Alumni relations teams are sort of designing their programming with the alumni at the center, making services and experiences available to them on demand, wherever they are, whenever they need them. And the staff and the programs are really facilitators of these experiences, right? I mean, there are many examples of such programs. Obviously, virtual events, are a good example. A lot of universities are also offering, continued learning opportunities to alumni where they can access it whenever they want. There's all sorts of implementations of, for example, online business directories, that those have become extremely popular during this time. Online career support networks, for example, several examples of programming like this, which is available on demand and accessible to all of your alumni. I'll actually go into a few more examples in a little bit. And I do understand that this is not conventional wisdom yet in terms of calling this sort of on demand, right? I mean, some of you may ask, why is on demand important, right? I mean, the fact is we live in an on-demand sort of economy, right? Like that's how we expect services to be delivered. I mean, back in the day we had DVDs, but now it's Netflix, accessible whenever, wherever you want to access it, right? Personalized to you. So, back in the day, you had your grocery stores, which are now slowly starting to be replaced by services like Instacart, right? So every industry is going through this shift. So it's not really surprising to me that, alumni expect services and experiences to be available on demand, right? With that, I want to ask you another quick question. Again, a poll. Let me just turn on, activate this poll. Yeah. So this is the question. How much of your programming is truly accessible to all your alumni? It's the same process again. If you're already on that web page, feel free to just refresh and you'll get the next set of questions. I see some of you are answering. If you've closed it again, you can go to slido.com and enter in the code 79376 or just scan this code. That's interesting. About half of you say that very little of your programming is accessible to all your alumni. We've got 33 responses. We'll wait for a few more. This is actually an interesting pattern because what we're also seeing is that this pattern is starting to emerge with some of the larger universities. And I think it's accelerating quite quickly, to be honest, in terms of institutions making their programming more and more accessible. We do understand that it's never going to be 100%. You still need those events which are accessible to a certain set of people. But I think a majority of your programming needs to be rethought from an accessibility perspective. We've got about 40 responses. We'll give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds to see if there's any more responses. Anybody else? All right. I think that's a good sort of indicative sort of set. We have about 41 responses out of the 73 that are on the webinar. So this is interesting. I mean, if you asked me, I think for anybody, so apart from this 12% who have more than 75% of their programming accessible to all of their alumni, I think for everybody else that's, certainly in this bucket, but also in these buckets, I think this is the time. I think this is a great opportunity for you to rethink alumni programming from an accessibility and being on demand perspective. I want to actually, show you a few examples. There's obviously the virtual events, right? All kinds of institutions have been successful in driving participation towards their virtual events. There's also online career support networks. I really like the one that Dartmouth has, and I'll show you those examples. But I'll actually switch over to these tabs to show you those examples. For example, Garench Academy did a complete sort of reunion virtually, right? So they had programming throughout the day, different Zoom rooms for different classes, and different sort of programming throughout the day in a sense that allowed people from different time zones, people from different parts of the world to be able to join that reunion, right? So they planned it really well, in my opinion, right? So there's lots of virtual events like this that are good examples of sort of on-demand, accessible alumni programming. This was an interesting one. What Dartmouth did here is basically they set up a challenge for their alumni. They said 50 new work opportunities for Dartmouth 20s. So, their latest class of 2020, they wanted to create at least 50 new work opportunities. And they said either sort of share an opportunity on the job board, right? Or join the LinkedIn group and sort of share job opportunities there, or otherwise just even spread the word, right? And then through that, they created a bunch of work opportunities for their alumni. And obviously what this meant was that because this was all being done on their website and then people being redirected to different platforms, everybody could participate, right? And that I think is a great example of something that you can add, a kind of program where you can add value to your alumni where it's still accessible to anyone, right? Like I said, business directories, alumni business directories are getting extremely popular. This was a good one. I think, if you look at sort of search the directory, St. Francis de Sales High School here, came up with a list of different categories of industries. And then within each of these being able to list all of the alumni run businesses. Again, the reason I think this is a good example is because this now is, again, all of your alumni can benefit from it, right? Either people who are, doing business with these businesses or the business owners themselves. Everybody can benefit from this kind of programming because this is really adding value to each of these people, right? So business directories are a great example. And even, I mean, this is a high school in California. They do a really good job with their online mentoring program. Everything is online. Everything is very clearly laid out. They have step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Anybody can come in here and basically look at what the mentoring program is about, how they can benefit from it, how they can be a mentor, how they can, pick a mentor, etc. And this, I think, is another good example of a program that I feel is really well done from an accessibility perspective, right? And with that, I'd like to hand over to Manshi to go over the rest of the trends. We went through trend 1 and trend 2. We'll cover the rest of the trends and then we'll do a quick recap at the end. Over to you, Manshi.
That was awesome. Thank you, Kalyan. So hi again. Here's the trend that we're going to talk about next. So it's new alumni will engage. So what we're noticing is that people have more time and they're keen on exploring new things at this point of time. And so if you're creative and offer programming that is valuable and accessible to your alumni, a lot of your alumni who have historically never engaged with you will now engage. And adding on to what Kalyan previously spoke about, virtual engagement means that you're now able to tap into a much wider network of alumni because things like location and time are less of a constraint now. And another interesting fact here is that it's not just really the young alumni who are actively engaging with you online. When you think about online engagement, the things that usually come to your mind are social media, webinars, podcasts, and naturally you start thinking, this is something for my younger alumni, but you just might be wrong. You'd actually be surprised by how many of your baby boomer and Gen X alumni are comfortable with engaging online now. And yeah, digital media is being used across generations, not only as a source of information, but also distraction. So with media consumption rates so high right now, this is the best time for you to digitally engage alumni. All right, moving on to the next trend, which is breadth over depth of engagement. So as an extension of some of the other trends that we spoke about so far, we're clearly seeing that this is the year we will see far more breadth and engagement compared to the depth. So as increasing number of institutions open themselves up to more channels of engagement that were previously mostly left unexplored, we're seeing wider reach when it comes to alumni engagement. And while you're still disappointed that you can't be in the same room with your alumni or volunteers, planning your next class reunion, or just, catching up to discuss politics or films, but on the brighter side, your current approach of digital engagement allows you to cover more ground. And I'm sure a lot of you might agree with me on this. So in 2020, we're actually seeing the opportunity for alumni relations teams to connect with more alumni segments than ever before. And moving on to our final major trend, trend number 5 is measuring participation, which becomes central to the alumni relations strategy in 2020. So this particular trend sort of ties back into how we defend the value of alumni relations and cultivating relationships, which Kalyan previously mentioned. So Kalyan talked about how an increasing number of institutions are adopting an integrated advancement office, right? And data also shows that there are significantly lesser alumni relations staff out there today. So those data points are extremely alarming to all of us here. And I believe it's all the more reason why alumni relations teams now, more than ever, need to rapidly evolve to be able to measure the outcome of each of their initiatives accurately. And while previously most engagement metrics were centered around measuring, let's say, in-person volunteer participation or event attendance, a shift towards digital engagement in these past few months has brought to the surface many more relevant metrics. So let's say metrics such as virtual event attendance, email opens, click-through rates, social media impressions and shares, and digital donors are now absolutely key to an alumni engagement and relations strategy, and they'll continue to do so going forward. So these were the topmost trends that we've seen emerge this year in alumni relations. And here are also a couple of additional and equally important ones that I would like to share with you all. So as you all know, with the pandemic, media consumption has gone up, and alumni across various generations have become even more active on social media channels like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. So if you're not leveraging this medium right now, you're definitely missing out on a lot. Next up is career guidance and employability. So we're all aware of the alarming data on unemployment rate across the globe, and we've touched upon it. Rather, we've talked about it in detail throughout this webinar. So that plus the class of 2020 graduates are really confused and they're really scared about the future that's ahead of them. So amidst all of this confusion, we're actually seeing an increased need for career guidance, employability services that are being offered by a lot of institutions across the world. Networking among alumni, so we're also seeing more avenues for alumni to socially network with their peers. So we're seeing a lot of alumni relations teams trying to provide alumni with a fun, restful time with friends. We're seeing virtual happy hours, gaming nights, dance parties, and just a lot of creative programming around this. Our final interesting trend, this is something that's also emerging, is how alumni volunteer programs are shaping up to be much more streamlined. Now that everything is happening digitally, volunteers now just have so much more visibility into all that they need to do, and hence it's very much streamlined. Right, so I'd say those are all the major trends that we've seen emerge in 2020. And what's important to understand here is that some of these changes will be permanent going forward. I personally believe that making your alumni programming more accessible, like Kalyan mentioned previously, to everyone is a permanent change, and that's a good thing. That's something that we should be doing. We should have been doing in the first place. So that shift was inevitable, and it's just that the pandemic only sort of accelerated it. So that's all on the trends, and I will now hand over to Kalyan so he can talk a little bit about how we help institutions upgrade their alumni programming.
Thanks, Manshi. We have a couple of questions. So I'd like to go through those first before we move forward. Cynthia Hayes asked, what are the reasons for the numbers of alumni professionals dwindling? So Cynthia, we briefly touched upon this earlier. I mean, there are two things that we can see. One is that as more institutions adopt like an integrated advancement office, we're seeing that there's more and more pressure on alumni relations professionals to focus on short-term, fundraising goals as opposed to long-term cultivation of alumni. And that's one of the causes. The other thing, which I think is something that is more in our control, is today, I think most alumni offices and most alumni professionals don't do a good enough job of defending the value of that alumni engagement program, right? Which really is something that I think we should fix, right? Like we need to be able to defend the value, defend the ROI of the alumni engagement program, because we all intuitively understand that it's important. But I think especially during times like these, where there is obviously a lot of pressure on the institution as well, from an advancement and fundraising perspective, I think it's really important that we showcase the value of the alumni engagement efforts that we're putting in. Hopefully that's answered your question. Another question is from Mark Elam. Hey, Mark, new young alumni like apps. Any plans to add an app? Yeah, this is an interesting one, and you can be sure that we get this a lot. We don't have a plan to build a mobile app. The reason for that is one, naturally we'll feel that young alumni want to have a lot of apps on their phone, but everybody is frustrated with just having too many apps on their phone. They don't want to add another app, especially where they don't plan to engage every day, right? Now, we're seeing data on even some of the largest sort of alumni apps. For example, the largest alumni communities in the US, someone like a Harvard alumni app, for example, has just a few thousand downloads on their phone, where they obviously have hundreds of thousands of alumni, right? So we're seeing that the install rates of these alumni apps are actually quite low. And the other advantage is that as long as your alumni website, your alumni programming is accessible on the phone, even if it's through the browser, you are able to continue to engage your alumni on their phones, which is actually quite important, right? And with some of the latest sort of technology, you're able to actually send them notifications on the phone, or you can obviously send them text messages, etc., to be able to engage with them on the phone, even if they don't have an app, right? So with some of that, we feel like the app is not necessarily the right direction to go in. Hopefully that's answered your question, Mark. Kia Stokes has a question. What are some good ideas for to virtually engage our alumni? Yeah, I'm happy to sort of share more examples with you, Kia, after the webinar. But I think some of the examples that we covered here, for example, let me just quickly go back here. So these are some good sort of virtual engagement opportunities, right? Like virtual events are obviously big. I've seen institutions do educational webinars, fun webinars, just happy hours, gaming nights. So all sorts of interesting opportunities from a virtual events perspective. But even if it's not events, I think thinking of, again, everything comes back to sort of saying, what do my alumni want right now? And how can I provide it to them in a more accessible way that's available for everyone, right? And so these are some good examples of those, right? Like you have the career support networks. I've seen a lot of institutions do very interesting things around, for example, creating a message board for the class of 2020, where the entire alumni community, came and said, congratulations, let us know how we can help you, things like that. That's actually quite interesting, right? And continued learning is an interesting opportunity also, because given that a lot of, classrooms are now being transferred to become more like an online education, those same sort of recorded sessions are being repurposed for continued education for alumni in the form of, podcasts, video resources, live streams, etc., right? And obviously online mentoring programs as well. So those are some examples. And I think hopefully that's helped answer your question. If anybody else has questions, feel free to type them into chat. I'm going to move on. Yeah, so as Manshi pointed out, those were some of the, a quick recap here. The 5 most important trends that we're seeing. Alumni relations as a profession is under threat. The numbers are sort of declining very rapidly. Alumni programs are becoming more accessible to everyone. New alumni are engaging. Alumni that have never engaged with you in the past, alumni that have potentially been classified as lost alumni are now starting to engage because of all the barriers that have been removed. There's more breadth of engagement now over the depth of engagement, measuring participation, and through that defending the value of your alumni engagement program becomes very, very central to the alumni relations strategy. And these are some of the other trends. I want to really quickly again sort of share how Almabase can help partner with institutions like yours very closely to be able to create and manage programs that are accessible as well as drive participation, right? I mean, every institution is different, right? If your team is out there, playing, let's say, football, we think of ourselves as your substitute on the bench, right? We're available whenever you call on us, and we'll do everything we can to help you succeed. That's the way we think of ourselves, right? If you're interested in sort of creating programs like an online directory or an online mentoring program or a job board or a discussion forum, affinity groups, all sorts of affinity groups, actually, chapters, etc., our online community solution helps you do just that. Through this solution, you'll be able to drive more engagement, update your alumni database, and through that inspire new donors, right? But if you're right now, if you're interested in organizing better events, virtual or in person, and driving more attendance to those events, then our events solution helps you with that. We have a very sort of seamless integration with Zoom, which makes it really easy for your audience to be able to sort of engage with the event while still enjoying the event on Zoom. Finally, if you want to run an online fundraising campaign, like, we're getting into the fall now, like a giving day or, maybe like a class campaign or anything like that, our peer-to-peer crowdfunding solution helps you leverage competitive elements like leaderboards, social media integrations, etc., to turn each of your donors into ambassadors for your campaign to drive more donations, right? So whether you're looking for better alumni data or improved engagement or more donations from your alumni population, we can partner with you and implement the best programs based on your needs. And I'm going to sort of end with this. I see a few more chat messages coming in. We'll get there. But this is the last slide that I have. We actually wanted to make an offer for all of you on the webinar. Obviously, if you're an existing customer and have access to these products, then this does not make sense. But if you're not a customer and if you maybe have 1 or 2 virtual events coming up, you can give us a shot completely free. There's no cost to it. You can just try it out. If it works for you, you can continue. Otherwise, you need not. So that's the offer on the virtual event side. And then on the fundraising side as well, for your next fundraising campaign, say your giving day in the fall or maybe a December drive or a reunion campaign, etc., you can do that with us at no upfront cost. We will only charge a percentage of whatever gifts you raise online. None of the checks or any other gifts that you get elsewhere will be counted. And this is actually honestly just a way for us to align our interests, because once we partner together, we will do everything we can to help you succeed. And only if you succeed with your campaign will we make money. So that's a way to align ourselves, right? And as you can see here, we're partners with Blackboard and Salesforce. So if you're a Blackboard shop or Salesforce, we can integrate easily with your existing systems. So, feel free to reach out to us if you want a demo of any of these solutions. I'm going to quickly sort of check if there are any more questions. Feel free to send your questions our way on chat. We're doing a virtual book study on C.S. Lewis, this Screw Tape Letters led by our priest. That's an interesting one.
We have a question from Shapol.
Got it. Firstly, Mark Strom asking about whether we'll email a recording of this presentation. Yes, we will. What approaches would you suggest for a new alumni association to focus on to engage alumni? Yeah, that's a great question, Chapol. And I think the right way to think about this, what we've seen with our we work with a lot of small shops And what we've seen is that the number one thing to do is focus on asking your alumni what they really want to feel connected to the institution, right? And use that as a starting point in terms of how you engage. Because honestly, the whole alumni engagement program has to revolve around your alumni. Like I said, alumni at the center, and being able to understand what is valuable for your alumni. Because only by giving value first, you can seek value in return, right? Eventually, you can cultivate these relationships to be able to benefit the university or the school that you work for. So the right thing to do is to try and first understand. I mean, some universities or some schools do this by, say, taking a sample set of alumni that are already engaged and asking them what they want. You can either do this as a survey, you can do this as a small group. I mean, the approaches may differ, right? But I think the important thing is to sort of focus on that question, which is, what do alumni think is valuable for them to be able to feel connected to the university, right? And again, different segments of your alumni population may feel differently about it. And then it comes back to then what resources do you have to be able to create what kind of programming. But it's certainly important to start with that question first. Hopefully I've answered your question, Chapol. If you have a follow-up, feel free to put that in chat. Barbara asks, do you have a survey you can share? Barbara, I can actually check with some of our customers and see if they'll be, okay to share their surveys. But I'm definitely making a note of that, and I'll follow up with you. I have your information. All right. I see one more question from, let's see, Barney. What online engagement services are non-alumni organizations or non-North American organizations offering that you think alumni shops should consider? Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's an interesting question, Barney. I think what we're seeing, especially with more global sort of alumni population, with institutions that have more global alumni population, is they tend to do a directory and like a map with all of their alumni. That tends to be one of the most popular sort of online engagement services that they provide, because they naturally want to engage alumni globally. And I think what I see as a difference with especially institutions in North America is that they tend to be a lot more focused on alumni in and around their area or in major cities, as opposed to thinking global from day one. And that, I think, is the most important sort of difference that I've seen. So I think, Reed, I see your question here. I'd love to see the survey as well. Happy to, find the survey and send it your way as well, along with Barbara. Mark just sent an observation of our next area of concentration: getting alumni to sign up for our alumni network. Blast emails through Razor's Edge, open rate is equal to 2%. Emails through Almabase, 92% open rate. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. That's an amazing stat. All right, let me see if there are any more questions. I think those are all the questions. If anybody has questions, feel free to.
We have one from Cynthia. What metrics beyond numbers at events should or can be used to measure the success of alumni programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's important to think about it this way, Cynthia. I think obviously, one, in terms of a standardization across the industry, unfortunately, there isn't something that's a standard and being followed by all institutions across the country. I'm sure we'll get there at some point. The closest we've gotten to standardization is the case alumni engagement metrics white paper that was released 2 years ago, where they sort of categorize engagement touchpoints as volunteering, philanthropic, communications, etc. But I think the more important thing to do is measure every single touch point, whether it's across email, social media, events, in person or virtual. Obviously, we all do a good job of measuring and capturing donations. The important thing to understand is not necessarily rush into try and doing, like an engagement score or something like that, although that seems to be the tendency for a lot of organizations. The important thing is to measure everything and find a way to normalize that measurement. And what I mean by that is, are you able to clearly identify across all of these different programs when a certain alum engages, right? Because they may use a different email ID, or they may use a different sort of identifier, even like participating in an alumni survey, right? Or any sort of touch point with the institution. Where most institutions seem to fail is that they don't normalize all of this engagement across these programs. And I think that's an area that institutions need to do a much better job of. I'm happy to also send you a more sort of detailed list of sort of engagement touch points that are more that are worth measuring. I have your message here on chat, so I'll follow up with that, maybe after the webinar. Hopefully that's answered your question. Reed has a question. Can you elaborate on notification/text messaging alerts? So Reed, I mean, the technology is available for it to happen. I mean, you are able to actually take mobile websites and be able to send push notifications on the mobile, just as it would appear if you had an app that would appear on your phone, and then they tap on it and then they go to the certain page on your website. So that's possible. I'm happy to follow up with you. I mean, right now, Almabase doesn't actually do that, but I'm happy to follow up with you with some of our plans in terms of how we're making that possible. Similarly with text messaging. Do we have any more questions? A number of us would be interested in the survey and engagement touch points. Could you send it in the follow-up email? Sure, Fall Shade, I think that's a good point. We'll sort of immediately follow up with the recording, but I'll definitely check with some of our customers and see if we can dig up a good sort of survey set of questions. Thank you, Adam, for that survey. Thank you, Nora. We'll follow up with you on that push notifications. That's not something that we do currently, but we do have some plans around that. So that's thank you for sort of adding your thoughts on that. Lily asks, have you seen trends in how the lost alumni are re-engaging? Yeah, I think the key to that, Lily, is that how are you using your existing alumni members to be able to find it meaningful to share your programming on their networks, right? Whether it's them sort of sharing it on social media, sharing it on WhatsApp, texting their classmates. I think making it really easy, because the only way you're going to find lost alumni at scale is if you can use the alumni that are already in contact with you to be able to reach further into their networks, right? Because even if you consider them a lost alumni, it's very likely that they're just one sort of person away in terms of a network, right? So in terms of like the trends in how lost alumni are engaging, we're definitely seeing that the institutions that have a much better social media presence and institutions that are creating programming that are valuable for alumni and create purpose for them to be able to share further in their networks, obviously do a much better job of finding their lost alumni through the alumni that they're already connected with. Hopefully that's answered your question, Lily. Do we have further questions? All right, perfect. Thank you all for joining today. Hopefully that was helpful. It's exactly 45 minutes past 1. So I think we did well on time. Yeah, thank you again. And if there's anything else that we can help with, feel free to reach out to me or Manshi or any contact that you have here at Almabase. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.